for Azeroth!
Heyo folks, Ditch here, and welcome to my next class specialization overview. Just a sec, there we go, and the music enabled to at least create some sphere. So, welcome to the next class overview. Today I will be going over the Enhancement Shaman specialization on my Troll Shaman. Now, the Enhancement Shaman has gone through quite a bit of a significant change since, of course, well, from Warlords to Legion. So they've changed quite a bit of it, and lots of its natural enhancement has actually been removed in exchange for more traditional combat. Now there are some abilities that remain similar overall, which is of course Astral Shift, and some others. Lightning Bolt still remains. There are some new abilities, talents have been altered, a lot of changes have been made. They still hold on, of course, to the most iconic ability, which is of course Bloodlust. And some of the other abilities are still pretty much the same. So without further ado, let's just get into it. You have, of course, let's go over the passive first. Now, if we don't count the talents with them, you have quite a few. The first one is Maelstrom Weapon. Now this used to be, of course, a generator which cost one of your casting abilities to reduce its casting time, and of course it could even turn into an instant one. Now this has changed a bit. Now it just causes that your weapons generate Maelstrom, which is the new resource generation effect for shamans, for enhancement and at least enhancement and elemental, which causes them to generate, of course, over time they generate, well, basically with their attacks, with certain attacks and their auto attacks they generate Maelstrom, which allows them to perform some of their more unique abilities. Now there are some abilities that are involved in this and some abilities that are less. So we'll get into that later. So the next one is of course Mastery Enhanced Shaman. Basically it increases the trigger for Stormbringer as well as it and Wind Fury by a certain percentage, as well as all my fire, frost and nature damage is increased by a significant percentage. So Reincarnation still remains. We all know what that does for any shamans out there. And there's of course Stormbringer, which causes that each of your main hand attacks has a 7% chance to reset the remaining cooldown of Storm Strike, and causes your next Storm Strike to cost 50% less Maelstrom. So it's not completely costless, but it has no cooldown triggering, and you can of course have a much more cheaper Storm Strike, which is degenerate. Now next up is Storm Lash, which causes that your weapons are enhanced. While your weapons are enhanced, your attacks have a chance to grant Storm Lash to up to 2 party or raid members for 8 seconds, causing attacks and spellcasts to deal additional nature damage. So basically this is pretty useful for raiding situations, considering how this works. And then of course Wind Fury, which causes that your attacks have a chance to do increased damage over time. Or better said, you do some additional attacks while with your next few auto attacks. So that's basically the sheer premise. You still have other abilities, Wind Shear, Water Walking, Spirit Walk, that all remains the same, so let's get into it. Now one of your primary abilities will be Rock Biter. This is something you'll be relying quite a bit on. As you can see, it is a very basic ability that just causes you to hit your attack with a Earth Empowerment, which can trigger of course the Storm Strike, which I will get into later, but as you can see it pretty much works the same. Now Flame Tongue has returned. It is still pretty much the same, except it is kind of the same though. Instead of just being a buff that you add to your weapon, you basically cause that your weapons become imbued with fire. You do a fire attack with it, and of course as it causes increased damage, which works out pretty well. So Lava Lash still remains, but it still uses your offhand weapon to use it, and as you can see, it does a significant amount of damage based on what it does. As you can see, I am hitting the target for quite a bit of damage here, and this will probably be your main tool for Maelstrom spending. So, just to generate a little bit of Maelstrom. As you can see, I built up some Maelstrom. Now for your more higher damage point, which does come with a cooldown, is of course Storm Strike, which still pretty much works the same, except it doesn't apply that debuff it used to do, which causes you to have increased critical strike. But for the remainder of it, it still pretty much works the same. So that's pretty much that. As you can see, boof, you do that and you do some increased damage. So now it used to be that you relied on chain lightning for cleaving. Now, since of course Chain Lightning has been removed, that has been switched with Crash Lightning, which since Warlords should be familiar to some of it. Basically, you activate this, and you drop down some massive lightning cleaving on everybody in the vicinity. This works out pretty well if you know how to utilize it. It works very well, to be honest, since it also causes that your Storm Strike and Lava Lash become cleaving effects. Now there are some abilities that remain. Healing Surge also works in a similar fashion as it did with the Maelstrom, except if you have more than 20 Maelstrom, this becomes an instant cast, which allows for some good self-healing when the need is required. And of course, just for the sake of it, you of course have Feral Spirit, and these guys used to give you, of course, healing back. Now they just, of course, do some damage as well as generate Maelstrom for you. So that's pretty much the whole basic premise behind the Feral Spirits. As you can see, they still remain as wolves, but they have been given a visual update since, of course, Warlords. Now, without further ado, of course, that's mostly the primary abilities, so let's get into the other abilities. You still have, of course, abilities like Astral Shift and, of course, Hex, which I cannot really use in that, but the basic premise is still there. You, of course, have, Lightning Bolt, which has been given quite a significant effect improvement, as well as that it actually now will always be an instant cast, which allows, of course, for some good long-range effect when you need it. Now, without further ado, let's get into the talents. I need to get out of combat. So, the one now that I actually already showed off was Hot Hand, which causes that your Flame Tongue melee attacks have a chance to make your next Lava Lash free of charge. This is actually pretty good considering how this works, because, well, I think it's pretty straightforward on what it does, you know. So, it works out well if you know how to use it properly. It definitely can work out quite well if you know how to use it. But that depends, of course, that it mostly relies on you keeping your Flame Tongue on your weapons. So you do need to keep that in mind. Now, before we get, of course, I need to take a good look. Alright, so the next one, which is definitely one of the more preferred one amongst most of us, but does come with a little bit of a drawback, is Boulder Fist, which is an improvement on Rock Biter, which causes that you actually do increase damage with your attacks, as well as that it causes that you gain a buff, which increases your critical strike chance by 5% and damage dealt increased by 5%. This does not stack with constant attacks, but it does come with a short recharge rate, but it's only like 5 seconds, and considering how you'll be spending all those points, I don't think this should be a problem considering. So this shouldn't be considered as much of an issue, and as you can see, you generate pretty much well with your attacks anyway. But if you don't like the idea of waiting on recharges of some of your abilities, this is definitely something you can actually live this off. If you don't like the idea of using constant waiting for a recharge on a certain ability, this is not, but considering the buff it gives, it's pretty impressive. Now next up is the one that is the most questionable of the bunch, which is Windsong, which causes that you lash out with your enemy against an enemy with nature damage and enhances your weapon attacks with wind, increasing your attack speed. So this increases, of course, your wind. It does some damage, increases your attack speed, and of course, as it describes, well, that's basically it. And although that's not bad, and that it generates Maelstrom, it is on a 45-second cooldown. So I can't exactly say that this is such a fantastic thing, even if it is 20 seconds, so it actually comes down that it's only on a 20-second cooldown once the duration has expired, or better said, the 25-second, but it is just, if you ask me, not worth the effort, not worth the time, and it's just, to be honest, I just don't think it's that good. Now, next up, we of course have the next list of abilities in the level 30, which is a bit strange considering, but I guess it's a choice. So the first one we'll go through is Rainfall, which is this strange kind of, let me just switch this around a bit, which is a replacement on Healing Rain, which used to be, of course, well, it could be an instant cast if, of course, you had enough Maelstrom. Now it's an instant cast still, and it has now been actually added with what used to be a talent that if you use certain abilities, the duration of Healing Ray would be increased. Now that remains still, but now you have to do it for certain other abilities. So what I do is I drop this, then I start dropping points, and the duration will be increased for the time being as long as this is active. So as you can see, its duration continues to increase up to a maximum of what I think is about 30 seconds, which is a pretty sweet long time. And you can definitely benefit it for some increased healing but it is not something that a lot of people recommend because it's an AoE healing and you don't take it along with you, and in a boss fight it requires quite a bit of movement. You might find this, of course, coming with a little bit of a drawback, so it really depends on what your taste is. So this doesn't really work. So the next up is the first way for a Enhancement Shaman to actually get close to an enemy, which is Feral Lunge. Basically, you turn into into your Ghost Wolf form and you do a little bit of damage to the enemy, but it works well because it is sort of like a charge ability at a 30-second cooldown. So it's not that bad, so I'll show it off here. As you can see, boop, I lunge forward and then I can immediately start going completely crazy on these dummies, and that's a pretty sweet deal. I mean, it's basically a good gap close for when you get back in close. If there's, for example, in a raid situation, for example, you need to get out of a sticky situation and there's an enemy on the other side of whatever you need to get to, you use this. It is considered a leap, but I'm not sure if you can actually, you know, travel over ground effects without taking any damage. I can't really confirm that, but it is a pretty sweet ability with a 30-second cooldown, which is, well, to be honest, pretty good if you know how to use it. Now, the next up one is one that will benefit your entire raid, which is actually basically well, it's that war ability for the druids. I actually completely forgot what it's named. I think it's called Furious Charge or something. But basically, what this does, you place this totem on the ground, and everybody in the area gains a movement speed increase. As you can see, I gain quite a bit, and as long as I stay within its range, it gives me that buff and it resets it every time when the duration ends until the totem disappears, which of course isn't for a long time. As you can see, of course, totems have been removed for quite some time now, and that will remain throughout everything. Alright then, that's pretty much that. Let's get to the next one, which is of course a different... which is all about totems. Now, this is a strange one, and I guess there's some good effect in it. So the first one is called the Voodoo Totem. And this basically causes that any enemy within the totem's area gets turned into a frog. It's basically an AoE hex on a shorter duration, but for the rest it still remains the same. So I plonk this down, and anyone within that area should be turned into a frog. Of course, it doesn't work on target dummies, but I think you can get the gist of it. It's a pretty straightforward ability this does. It's basically AoE CC on demand, but it does come with a 30-second cooldown. And considering its effect, this doesn't work well with AoE cleaving, considering that of course it causes all enemies to be turned back. So I wouldn't really consider this good, considering it also works when you leave the area, and whenever you're hexed or polymorph, you tend to just run around like a crazy little frog, so there's a chance you might actually run out of it. So people on the edge might get out of it, people in the center probably not such a big chance, but either way, we get the idea. So next up is the Earth Grab Totem, which is, well, it's pretty much as it always was, but it's just now a talent, of course. You pop this, you place this somewhere, and all enemies in the area get, of course, grabbed by these earthly roots that you use. It's not a very long effect, and the rooting works only once, and of course if they take damage it's immediately removed, and afterwards it just becomes a slowing effect like it originally was. This works well maybe in some situations where kiting is necessary, if they can be affected by CC at all. Overall though, it's not considered to be a very effective situation compared to the last totem, which is Lightning Surge Totem. Now anyone who is familiar with, of course, playing a shaman, knows that this used to be a standard totem. Now it's been changed into a talent, and it still remains the same. So wait just a second. So it still works the same. Basically it's a delay. It's a delay of 2 seconds. You place this on the ground like this, and after 2 seconds it detonates, and all enemies are stunned for 5 seconds. Now it's of course only within the area they get. The nice thing about it now that they've changed it into such you can actually place it where you want, it still works the same either way. You pop this totem down, after 2 seconds anyone gets stunned in the area. This works well in certain raid situations where you actually may require that kind of amount of stun. If you don't, well, it's not really that considered to be a very effective totem, considering usually in raid situations most mobs can't be CC'd in that heavy amount. So, but overall this could still be useful in certain situations, even for the emergency situations you might find yourself in. Now let's get up to the next one, which actually requires me to put an ability up that I actually usually never keep in this section because I just don't see the point of it. And there we go. I gotta find a way to... gotta put some place to pop this thing. I guess this works as well as it does. So basically the next one is called... is of course with the talents. The first one is the one I primarily use myself, which is Ancestral Swiftness, which basically increases your haste by 10%. 10% doesn't of course sound that great, but considering of course that it also works with an increase on your statistics, this might actually help out quite a bit. Plus of course it decreases the cooldown on your abilities, as well as of course on your attack, so you generate Maelstrom even quicker, which allows you to use other abilities much more in succession. Your Storm Strike gets reduced cooldown, so it's only more benefits overall. Now Hailstorm is a enhancement on your Frostbrand, which is a slowing attack on your with a slowing attack for one of your abilities, and this causes that it enhances your, causing each of your weapon attacks to also deal increased frost damage for the same duration that it normally leaves on you, which causes that you, as long as you keep attacking any enemy who has been frost branded, you will continue to do that damage. So let's build up some Maelstrom. So I use this, and as you can see, I do reduced damage, but as you can see, I also increase the damage that I do. But considering that Frostbrand actually requires you to use Maelstrom, I wouldn't consider this a very useful ability, because Hailstorm is mostly meant, of course, for, well, for slowing effects, and in PvE situations you don't do that as much, and the damage is not that impressive compared to, for example, something like Lava Lash. So even though this doesn't have any cooldown and it costs 20 Maelstrom, it's basically a little cheaper for a lower damage. But with this, of course, it does turn it into more of a damage effect. But it's just more Maelstrom that'll just be, you know, kind of wasted. So not exactly something I would use. Next up is Lightning Shield, which has been turned into a talent. It still pretty much works the same as it always does. It basically applies a shield to you. And as long as you do damage, this shield will also do some additional damage along with it. You of course also deal damage with it. Of course you also deal damage whenever you take damage, but unfortunately it is only a chance, and considering that, that's just not very useful. So there's a chance. They never say how much the chance is. There's no proc showing. So this could be like a 30% chance or a 20% chance or a 50% chance, but I'd say it's definitely not a 30% chance or even a 50, because, well, you saw how many these procs actually triggered and it wasn't a lot. But still, if you just want some extra damage that doesn't require you to use more abilities, this is definitely something you might want to keep an eye out. Anyway, let's move on. So next up is Tempest, which causes, of course, as you may have already noticed, it causes that whenever I gain the Stormbringer effect, it actually affects this next two Storm Strikes, which, as it was already shown, it basically allows 2 Storm Strikes at half the Maelstrom cost and with no cooldown, so you got some massive damage spike for a short duration. Definitely one of the better ones in this list. Now next up is Overcharge, which causes that your Lightning Bolt actually now uses Maelstrom to actually increase its own damage. As you can see, I'm building up some Maelstrom here. And as you can see, that can do some massive damage, but it does come that now, of course, Lightning Bolt has a cooldown. So you might want to consider not using this much, because it requires Maelstrom, which means you don't use these abilities, which can help you out more. It's useful, I guess, for range, but I wouldn't recommend it that much. Next up is Empowered Stormlash, which basically causes that Stormlash spreads to an additional target, which basically means that another one of your party members gains an increase in their damage. And it deals a 35% additional damage. Not bad, but I can't really show it off considering I'm not in a group setting. But I think you can get the gist of it. Now, in the level 90 talents, it's all about one thing, which is Massive Cleaving. It's all about one thing, and that's the AoE damage. Now, on the first one of the level 90 talents, we have Crashing Storm. Basically, what this causes is that Crash Lightning electrifies the ground beneath the target. So I activate this, and it leaves an electrified ground on the... It leaves some electrifying effects on the ground. It still holds on to its cleaving effect that it does, and you deal and of course it increases damage. So this is definitely one of the better ones, considering if you're facing large groups. Even if they move out of it, the little bit of extra damage might help out, and it still holds onto its cleaving effect. And considering that it doesn't increase, like for example the Maelstrom cost, this is definitely one of the better ones to go for within this talent, though the other ones have their situation when you need it. Next up is Fury of Air, and just for the sake of it, we'll of course get rid of that, because we don't need that. Basically can actually get rid of the rest too, so let's just do that. That's probably easier to do anyway. There we go. So basically how this works is you build up some Maelstrom, and when you want AoE all around you, you activate this and you begin doing damage to all enemies around you. Now this works of course that it consumes Maelstrom over time. Now this isn't bad, but considering that you might want to dump more points into other of your abilities, this could be sustained for quite some time. But considering that some of you, particularly Stormstrike, drains your Maelstrom by a large amount, I wouldn't rely on this too much unless you're planning to really need the cleaving, so you don't really use this unless it's in combination with Crash Lightning, which doesn't require as much of Maelstrom in general. So that's definitely something that you could consider, but as you can see, as soon as you drop down to 0 Maelstrom, the Fury of Wind effect is removed. Of course, you can immediately trigger it again as soon as you build up, but considering that it's cleaving effect and it doesn't do good single target damage, it's useful for a little bit of slowing as well as cleaving effect around you, but that's about where you should depend on it in general. Now the next one up in the list should be familiar to anyone who has played Thrall in Heroes of Storm. It is called Sundering, and although its range is of course severely reduced in this, it still pretty much works the same as it always does. You generate some Maelstrom, as you can see, and what it does, it shatters a line of earth in front of you, and it damages all enemies within range as well as moves them to the side. Now of course this can't be shown off with a target dummy, but you get the amazing effect. As you can see, it still looks exactly the same. It doesn't show it for that long, but you activate this and you immediately create this quite large line of effect in front of you. So definitely not a bad choice to have, but it does have a 40-second cooldown. It does quite a bit of physical damage, but it is a bit on the long cooldown. If this had about the same cooldown as the Earthen Spike, which I will get to later, this would be pretty cool. But considering it's a 40-second cooldown for something that costs 60 Maelstrom, it's a little bit of a pricey ability to use, so I wouldn't really recommend it myself, but I guess that's up to you to decide. Next up in the level 100 talents, we have Ascendance, Landslide, and Earthen Spike. Let's get to the Landslide first. Basically, this causes that your main attack ability, which is now, of course, Boulder Fist. Of course, you can have one of the other two, so that makes it Rock Biter. Causes that it increases your agility by 8% for 10 seconds. Now, what Boulder Fist is, of course, amps up it even further, so you gain it. So you basically gain an increase on your agility by 8%, and although that's not bad, 8% isn't really that much. I guess if it was 10 seconds and it was like 50, it would get a little out of control, but it's only like 8%. That's not a lot. 10 would be at least a little bit more of a sweet deal, and I can't really consider this to be really that great. This to be so great considering what it does. So let's just get straight up to the next one, which is Earthen Spike. Now this comes at 30 Maelstrom, and basically it is both it's a pretty significant damage ability as well as a debuff on the enemy target. So what I do this, I pop this on the enemy, they take a massive amount of damage, and for the next 10 seconds they take increased damage from all my nature and physical attacks. So basically this is a pretty sweet deal, considering it's only on a 20-second cooldown, and when the debuff expires it's actually only on 10 seconds, and it allows for some severe amount of damage output on a pretty significant basis. I consider it one of my more favorite abilities because, of course, the enemy takes increased damage from all my attacks, and it's a bit of good damage spike, no pun intended, of course, in general. So I definitely would consider this as one of the more recommended ones, considering how effective it can be used if you know how to time it. Of course, it's all about the perfect timing. First, try to build up some good amount of Maelstrom. If necessary, leave some of your other abilities off. There you go. Then you start unloading hell on everything. And as you can see, that's quite a significant amount of damage you can deal out with this thing. So definitely something you should consider for good use. Just for the sake of it, keep a little bit of extra flashiness going on until the abilities are cooldown, which is now. Now the last one is familiar to anyone who got this before, of course. So the Legion patch came in, which is Ascendance. Now anyone who loves being a flashy, monstrous, basically elemental devil should be familiar with this. Basically, it still works the same. You ascend into an elemental ascended form, causing enhanced effects and, of course, enhancing you in general. It doesn't really increase your damage output, but it enhances some of your abilities, causing that you do unique abilities compared to others. So basically, as an Enhancement Shaman, you turn into an air element, enhanced ascendant, and you do some pretty significant abilities. As you can see, you can use air abilities, and Storm Strike is turned into Wind Strike, which of course, as you can see, isn't too bad, but it does come with a little bit of a cost, which is of course it is only 15 seconds, which could be considered significant, but I would consider it a little lackluster considering it doesn't cost anything, but it's on a 13-minute. Well, 13 would be ridiculously longer. Would be even longer than the Metamorphosis for the Demon Hunter. It's not on a 30-second cooldown. It's on a 3-minute cooldown. Now, I'm seriously getting my time numbers completely wrong. It's on a 3-minute cooldown, and considering it only lasts for 15 seconds, that's not really long. If it was 20 or at least 25, it would be much more worth it. 15 seconds for a 3-minute cooldown, personal cooldown. Seriously? I'm better off with this. Or this. It's just not worth it anymore. It's only an enhancement on some of your abilities. It doesn't increase your attack damage. It doesn't increase your damage potential. It only enhances Wind Strike. What the? Hey, ho, ho. Hey, I didn't ask for that, so. Okay, so that just happened. Just ignore that. I don't know what that was about. Well, actually, I do, but I don't have time for that right now. As you can see, that's pretty much the whole gist of Ascendance. It's just not worth it, if you consider it. I gotta be honest. It's in the personal opinion. If you like transforming into a all-powerful elemental demon, go nuts. But compared to the other two, this is definitely the weaker of the bunch, if I've got to be honest. Now, as you can see, some people might find some kind of overhead, some kind of linking between these abilities, comparison to, for example, Wowhead's talent recommendation. But to be honest, I have to agree with them on this one. This one makes the most sense, except for, of course, for this one, but I'm waiting. The only one I don't take is Landslide, and instead I take Earthen Spike. Some people might disagree with that choice, but hey, everybody's got his own play style, and I actually really like Earthen Spike. It's got some good damage, and considering, I mean, it's 10 Maelstrom less for only 2 damage less. It may sound like significant, but with the debuff that you apply to your target, it's a pretty sweet deal, if I've got to be honest. So I can't really say that this is a bad idea, but it's all up to choice and taste. So, to be honest, what do I think about the final verdict about the Enhancement Shaman? They've actually made it a much more fun specialization to play. The old Enhancement Shaman wasn't bad, but sometimes you were just waiting off for a rotation to use some of your abilities. Some of your abilities were just far too much reliable on cooldown rather than on a certain resource generation that they could have relied on, as in this particular one. So I've got to be honest, this is definitely one of my much more favorite ideas than what they've done with the Enhancement Shaman. It's been going through so many alterations and changes throughout the years, and I've got to say that this one has got to be the best choice and the best one to have designed in the overall idea of a wielder of weapons who enhances them with elemental power to then, of course, beat the crap out of anything that gets in its way. The Crash Lightning is definitely one of the more preferred abilities when it comes to cleaving, because it makes much more sense rather than the old one, which was, of course, you apply Flame Shock with Flame Shock, and then you spread that around with Lava Lash. It was just, I'm not saying it was bad, but it just didn't make much sense to me. I mean, this makes much more sense. You just bring down lightning upon everybody within your, well, let's say cleaving range, which just makes much more sense if you ask me. So I am overall very happy with Blizzard's design on this specialization. I don't know damage numbers, that's not what I'm about. This was all just about the overview on the spell effects, the animations. As you can see, every specialization, of course, has been getting it. Particularly, of course, the melee specialization. Look at that Storm Strike. The old one was just the Rogue Mutilate with a lightning effect to it. This is way more effective. Some, of course, have a little less flashy effect to it than others. But overall, I can definitely say that they have improved greatly on the Enhancement Shaman. You still rely partially, of course, on some of the enhancement that you just gained. But I can definitely say that this is one of those specializations that I can definitely now get behind more. And Shaman has become much more of an active specialization to put time in. So that's pretty much the whole Enhancement Shaman in a nutshell. Become a elemental warrior of some description is the best way I would say it. It's much more comes close to the idea of what Fall always was. And it's just way more fun to play like this. I can't wait, of course, for Legion. We're going to get my hands on the Doom Hammer, and that's just going to be amazing. So that's pretty much the entire overview on the Enhancement Shaman in World of Warcraft Legion. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. If you didn't, well, that's too bad for you. I'm uploading it anyway. At this point, I've already done so. And that's pretty much the whole gist of this bad boy. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, because that will make me a very happy man. And if you want to see more of my overview videos, you can find a few of them on my channel, which you can of course do by clicking the link in, well, below this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I certainly had an enjoyment playing this specialization again, and I hope to see you guys in more of my videos. Until then, be good, be awesome, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye!